All right, hello and welcome to episode 7 of the Bamboo Chalupa Digital Marketing Podcast. My name is Brett Snyder, the owner of Knucklepuck, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, Mr. Nate Shiver, the author of shiverweb.com.
Yes, hello.
So on today's podcast, we're actually going to talk about a pretty heated debate that goes on in the SEO world, and that has to do with SEO and social media. Now, I'm actually speaking at the State of Search conference in Dallas on Tuesday about how, say, SEO and social media can work together to help accomplish your digital marketing goals. And so in light of that, Nate and I were tossing around some ideas, and we're actually going to do this in a 3-part series. On this episode, we're going to talk about social media as a ranking factor. And this is a huge debate, something that the SEO community is largely divided on. So we're going to go and give you guys our take on how social media actually impacts the ranking factors associated with SEO. In our next episode, we're going to talk about how social media can be used to build relationships, whether that's with your key influencers, your marketing prospects, or what have you. And on the third episode, we're actually going to talk about using social media to amplify your SEO campaigns. And specifically, we're going to talk about paid media amplification. So this will be your Facebook ads, stumble upon paid discovery. We're going to touch on Reddit, all of these things that can use paid media to actually amplify SEO campaigns through social media.
Right. But first, social media as a search engine ranking factor. And social as a ranking factor has been a consistent debate for years now. And there's a lot of evidence to support the fact that SEO and social are at least very highly correlated. Search Metrics, which they do a lot of industry research and studies, they released their 2014 study of search engine ranking factors. And social signals accounted for 7 of the top 10 most highly correlated metrics towards search rankings. But before we get into the meat of this debate, let's take a step back and think about what the web is in general. And in reality, the web is social, and social goes beyond just Facebook and Twitter. And search engines are designed to explore the social web, and they're designed to try to model relationships via the web. Websites are essentially in search engine algorithms thinking they're being used as a proxy for humans, because at its core, search engine algorithms are entirely based on relationships, endorsements among web entities. So when you have a link from one website to another, you could think about that in terms of HTML code, but in reality, that's one human who happens to own a website endorsing the written word of another human who happens to own another website.
And we introduced this concept because really it sums up the entire reason why people, and SEOs in particular, want so badly for social media to be considered a ranking factor. Nate just talked about the idea that search engines exist to model relationships across the web. And the goal from the search engine perspective is to, with a high degree of confidence, be able to say, this is an authoritative website, and this is an authoritative website that is specifically related to my user's search query. For Google, this degree of confidence is called PageRank. Every page has a certain amount of PageRank. The higher the PageRank, the more relevant and authoritative it is. Links from a page with high PageRank carry more weight than links from a page with low PageRank. It's essentially looking at how relationships are modeled across the web and being able to assign qualitative values to the strength of these relationships. Websites are evaluated as a product of their social network. And make no mistake, search engines want to take into account social media signals because these represent another opportunity for them to model your online relationships and another opportunity for them to look at it and say, this is, I can say with a high degree of confidence, this is an authoritative site that is relevant to a user searching with this particular query.
Exactly. And what we have to remember is that the majority of the online population does not have a website. And so if Google's trying to figure out, okay, what do people in general think is the most authoritative website or most relevant website? They don't have access to all the data because people don't have websites, but they do have Facebook. They do have Twitter. There's around 1 billion-ish websites, depending on how you count them, that are owned by companies, by individuals, by nonprofits, by individuals who own multiple websites. And so that's 1 billion websites. But in context, Twitter has 284 million active users. So a quarter of all the websites existent. And Facebook has 1.35 billion active users. And if you think about it, that's more Facebook profiles than there are websites. And they're profiles of real people. And people use social networks as their way to communicate and interact online. And any search engine that attempts to model relationships, real life relationships, to demonstrate quality, and that's going to be Google, Bing, Yandex, all of them, would love to incorporate these attributes from Twitter users, Facebook profiles into their ranking algorithm.
The problem here is they can't. And that's the simple fact of the matter, is that Google and Yahoo and Bing is actually a different animal. They have a little bit of a different relationship with Facebook. But by and large, search engines do not have the tools and the data necessary to evaluate social media with any high degree of confidence. Metrics can be easily manipulated. Tweets, Facebook likes, plus ones, all of these can be easily manipulated. Updates in the social web happen so quickly that this information may become relevant before Google even has a chance to crawl it. Last year at SMX West in San Jose, Amit Singhal, who's a senior Google fellow, he gave the keynote and actually cited this in particular as the reason why Google doesn't use social factors, because things change so quickly. You may change your relationship status. You may die. Information just evolves so quickly in the social web that Google does not have the tools and the processes in place to be able to keep up with this. And I keep coming back to this high degree of confidence because that's really the key element here, is Google needs to be able to assess these metrics and these ranking factors in such a way that they can apply that to their entire algorithm. This is not something where they're going to say, hey, we want to look at this for, just sports scores. If something's going to be a ranking factor, they want to work it into the entire algorithm. So they need to know that across the millions and millions of searches that are take place every day, they need to know that they are going to be able to drive consistently quality results. And so you kind of hear that, and I imagine the folks at home are probably sitting there saying, well, what about these top 10 most highly correlated ranking factors? Nate just talked about search metrics, and 70% of the top 10 highly correlated ranking factors are actually social media metrics. And this is where the language that we use makes all the difference. Correlation is not causation. Correlation and causation are often confused. There's actually a great XKCD comment about correlation and causation, but the difference here is that correlation are when two things are related. They share what is kind of called the compounding variable. But causation is when there is an actual relationship that says A caused B. So for example, when more ice cream is consumed, here's the classic example. The more ice cream that is consumed, the higher rate of drowning there is in the United States. This isn't to say that eating ice cream causes drowning, but this is to say that eating ice cream and going swimming are both activities that take place largely in the summer. As we eat more ice cream because it's hot, and as we go swimming more often, these things are correlated. They share that compounding variable, but eating ice cream does not cause drowning deaths. And this is a very important differentiator to make when we're talking about social media, because there is no argument against a correlation relationship, but there is no proof, and there's actually considerable proof against the argument that social media factors actually have a causal impact on rankings.
Yeah, and I love that example. And there's a great quote from Edward Tufte that goes, correlation is not causation, but it sure is a hint. And the same relationships that Google attempts to qualify through links and other online networks, they actually exist among social media sites. A highly connected website in the traditional web say Huffington Post or Slate.com, likely has invested in curating the audience that they have through social channels as well. So social media and SEO are grounded in the same principles, relationships. And we'll get into this more in the next episode. But the reason so many people argue that social is a ranking factor is that search engine optimization actually leverages these relationships.
And this gets at one last thing that's essential to understand about why social media is not a ranking factor. The search engine doesn't necessarily have access to these relationships. The social media sites won't provide it, and frankly, why would they? The lifeblood of a social media site is its users and the engagement through those users. Why would they want to give one of their competitors access to steal that engagement? And this is a key element that actually it really bears repeating here. Social networks and search engines are competitors. More than just sharing pictures of your puppy, or for me in particular, complaining about how bad the Oakland Raiders season is going again, they represent the new word of mouth and how people find information. And that's terrifying for a search engine because the search engine is the current way that people find information. It's the current word of mouth. And Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Pinterest, YouTube, any of these social media sites actually start to challenge that status quo and are putting us in a position where we have to evaluate how, as marketers, how our users are actually finding information on the web and make really a very conscious decision about where we invest our resources that's going to give us the best return on reaching that audience.
Yeah, and actually, there's a good real life example of a search engine and its interaction with the social network, and that's Google Plus. I mean, back in 2011, Google was scared to death of being behind on losing this information, of being able to tap into real life word of mouth, real life endorsements from people who didn't have websites, and that's part of the reason they launched Google Plus. It wasn't just for the plus ones and the posting random things. They wanted to have a verified identity. They wanted to be able to track and see what people did, what websites they interacted with, what they did with their email, and how that interacted with Google Maps and Google Places, and what you're actually sharing with your sister and what you're telling your friend to do. It was never clear if they completely integrated it into the algorithm, but it was obvious that they wanted that information so badly that they basically did a bet the farm company and devoted huge resources to starting up a program that still exists today.
And I think it's one of those things where you say bet the farm, and I think that's a very interesting choice of words here because they bet the farm, and typically when you think about that, it's somebody who went all in on something that maybe does or does not pan out, but they have to. Google has to find a way to understand the social web, or they are going to rapidly become outdated. And we want to circle back to the concept of access that we were talking about a few minutes ago. And remembering what Nate said, that at its core, Google launched Google Plus so that they can own the access to these interactions. That's the overwhelming roadblock here to Google's ability to maintain their dominance in search because their relationship model is becoming outdated. It's becoming outdated by the day. There were not 1.35 billion active Facebook users a year ago. The amount of information that is produced on social media sites and the speed at which this information is produced is unprecedented. And the only way that Google or Yahoo or Bing or any search engine that wants to compete is they have to be able to, interpret this information beyond their current capabilities. To be clear here, search engines can crawl social media content in the sense that they can crawl any web content that they have access to. They are able to see if your tweets are public or your Facebook profile isn't protected. They can crawl these pages just as they would the blog post, just as they would the Bamboo Chalupa, post that we're going to put out on the website with the show notes and our links here. The problem here is they have to infer information from the access that they have. They do not have all of the kind of back-end information about where people are networked together through Facebook, outside of the privacy concerns, where these likes or these plus ones or these retweets are actually coming from. And the difference is coming back to that phrase I know I've repeated a couple of times now, but it's so, so important here, is that they cannot incorporate this information to the algorithm with a high enough degree of confidence to be able to roll that out across their entire product.
Yeah, and so going back to what you just mentioned about the speed, remember that search engines are cached versions of web content, and that's what they use in their algorithm to rank. So they don't rank your website that exists on your server. They go and they take a picture of your website at a certain point in time and put it onto Google servers or Bing servers. And then when someone types in a query, they're going to go look at that snapshot that they have on their servers and tell you, okay, what's the most relevant result? And social media has blown up this model because those snapshots are no longer sufficient with the pace of change of content on the web. You could think of of Twitter as having access to a live video feed, whereas Google is getting snapshots thrown at them. And Google tries to incorporate this. There's it if you do a search for a live news event, something that's going on in real time, you will see Google News results being integrated into organic results. If you were to do a search for elections this week or last week, you would see a very different set of search results than you would have seen if you had searched for elections back in May or April. And a lot of times Google struggles with identifying and qualifying this content. When does elections mean that people want to see results, and when does it mean that they just want to find out when the date is? And this is a good segue into how we define ranking factors and how it goes into qualifying user intent, so to speak.
And for the sake of argument here, we're going to define a ranking factor as any concrete element of the search engine ranking algorithm that is used to evaluate quality. This has to be something that can be measured. It has to be something that can be applied algorithmically. It can be a qualitative concept. The idea of quality is a qualitative concept anyway. It's a little bit of a tongue twister, I know, but ranking factors can be qualitative, but there has to be some sort of quantitative way to identify this and to define this before it can be considered a signal that the search engine can use in its algorithm. And we don't know all of the ranking factors of any particular search engine, and we never will. And realistically, nobody is. It's almost impossible to even wrap your mind around how much actually goes into these search engine algorithms to understand each individual ranking factor. But if you think about it a little bit less literally, search engines aren't governed by ranking factors as much as they're governed by quality signals.
And this is a really important distinction to make in the context of social and SEO. So ranking factors are a means to an end in determining quality, much like keyword rankings are a means to an end to driving engagement through a search engine. The former, so keyword rankings, is a necessary stepping stone to reach the latter. If you don't rank number 1 or number 5, you won't get the same, or you will get more engagement than if you ranked 11 or 15. And so you have to have something tangible and concrete that you can use to build on to reach your ultimate goal. And when we talk about social media, even though there's an undeniable correlation between social signals and SEO, we have to recognize that what tangible ranking factors the search engine can use to establish with a high degree of confidence necessary to actually factor that in. So when you look at privacy settings or manipulated spam accounts, restrictions, timing, all these affect how confident a search engine can be with the confidence in their results. So, they might be able to see something on Twitter, but they won't be able to use that to build on it to actually figure out, okay, what does having a ton of tweets mean? And this points to a theme that we've come back to a lot, which is how search engines value quality over quantity. Is would more tweets be more valuable than a tweet from a highly reputable source? Would having a million tweets to your blog post be better or worse than having a tweet from the White House or the editor of the New York Times?
If you think about it, it goes back to an age-old argument we've had in SEO. Is 10 links from mediocre sites better than one link from a completely awesome site? And think about how long it took the search engines kind of work out the balance there with how they evaluate that. And now that entire model is shifted. And it goes back to why Google invested so heavily in Google Plus and why they bet the farm on it, to borrow Nate's phrase there. If they had all of the information about our social networks, the results get better. That's almost undeniable. If they had access to the Twitter results and Facebook, then the results will get better because they have more information to process to be able to return the most relevant results. We don't have the same issues that we have right now with time sensitivity. We don't have the same issues with disparate sources of information. This is something where when we look at social media as a ranking factor, make no mistake that search engines desperately want to be able to incorporate this, but for the time being, they can't. And this places Google's supremacy in question, and not supremacy as a search engine over Yahoo, Bing, Yandex, some of the other ones, Bleco, DuckDuckGo, anything that you can kind of come back to. But their supremacy is the way that we find information on the web. They fell behind the curve. They knew it. They knew it when they went to launch Google Plus. But unfortunately, they have not been able to recover the ground that they lost. And it's becoming, the gaps are becoming increasingly bigger, and it's getting to be much more difficult for them to recover. And this isn't to say that Google is going to disappear. They'll be able to adapt, and they will still have their, they still have their value add in the way that they're able to process information. But as marketers in almost 2015 now, as marketers that specialize in reaching consumers through the web, we have to have a very intimate understanding of how search engines and social media both share this concept of relationship modeling and how that is able to be used in terms of developing strategies to be able to enhance your visibility across either medium, whether that be social media or SEO.
All right, so we've talked about correlation and causation. We've talked about relationship modeling and ranking factors versus quality signals to try to figure out, is it SEO or is it social? But regardless of your position on whether or not social media is or is not a ranking factor before, during, or after this episode, we sort of come back to the same conclusion, which is that really it doesn't matter. There might be fights over how much budget goes to social versus SEO, but the benefits to social media as an extension of your SEO strategy are independently valuable. These are highly complementary, and even when social media isn't a direct causal ranking factor, oh, I got 100 tweets on this article, that means it's going to rank higher. Okay, that's not true, but that will have an indirect impact on your SEO efforts, as we'll see.
And we talk about this because remember, the competitive advantages that your business possesses to be successful in SEO can be leveraged towards social media and vice versa. And we talk about the fact that search engines can in fact crawl social information. You see it if you go and search for your brand name, go look at the branded search results. One of my kind of favorite examples for people that say social media doesn't matter to SEO, go to Google and type in Amy's Baking Company. For anybody who's not familiar, Amy's Baking Company was on Kitchen Nightmares with Gordon Ramsay. This was, I believe, May of 2013, where Gordon Ramsay had to basically walk out. It's the first time he ever walked out. He said, "I can't help you. You are impossible to work with." The episode aired, and people who had had a bad experience at Amy's Baking Company took to Facebook, Twitter, to Yelp, to all these social media sites to express their disappointment in Amy's Baking Company. And rather than acknowledging the first rule of the internet, which is don't feed the trolls, Amy's Baking Company decided to respond. And it was, even Wikipedia has cited this exchange as a almost poster example of how not to perform on social media. And I give you that little anecdote because That was May of 2013. If you go and you Google Amy's Baking Company today in November of 2014, if memory serves, and last time I looked at it earlier this week, 7 of the top 10 results were articles associated with that social media fiasco. They can't have people look for their brand on Google without seeing the impact of their social activity. We talk about this idea of it being an extension of your online reputation. It validates who you are online. We're going to talk next week about using these relationships to be able to validate your online reputation. And social media is a tremendous tool for that. We talk about the idea of how social media reflects consumer behavior, and it reflects that behavior in real time. And it's another way to maintain your offline relationships. If you meet somebody at a conference, now you have an opportunity to maintain that relationship, a potential link partner, which helps support your SEO, a potential person to help promote and reach, expand the scope of your content marketing to, again, reach potential link partners or even, referral sources. So the overlap and the complementary nature of SEO and social media is so overwhelming that regardless of whether or not you believe that social has a causal impact on search rankings, it really is. There's no argument against investing in both of these mediums to be able to accomplish your overall goal, and as we've talked about before, and that's to be where your audience is.
All right, so next week, just like Brett said, we're going to go into even more detail about how social media can be used to build relationships and other things that are really, really valuable for your SEO campaigns, and vice versa. And we're going to have a lot of links to things that we mentioned, and then also to Brett's State of Search deck in this series of show notes. So we will keep those updated. Be sure to check them out on the website on bamboochalupa.com. Also, please subscribe to the podcast in iTunes and leave a comment and rating while you're there, or check us out on Stitcher Smart Radio, which we are also now on. It gives us great feedback and helps others discover the show. So for Brett Snyder, I am Nate Shiver. Thanks for listening.